Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this opening keynote panel on European industries on the path through green recovery, what role for climate action? My name is Frederic Simon. I'm the Energy and Environment Editor of Euractiv, and I will have the pleasure of moderating today's discussion. Now, as you can imagine, this debate on climate policy is extremely timely for a number of reasons. First, we've entered a new political cycle with a new European Commission that was sworn in just at the end of last year. And for the first time in Europe's history, climate action is at the very top of the Commission's political agenda with the European Green Deal that was branded as Europe's new growth strategy by Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Now, since December last year, not everything turned out as expected, to say the least. The COVID-19 crisis has taken Europe by storm, with most projections now pointing to a severe recession for this year, the worst recession, in fact, since the Second World War. So what does this all mean for the EU's climate agenda? Is greater ambition still the order of the day, or can a green recovery help Europe leapfrog to a more sustainable economic model? To debate this topic today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Peter Liese, a German member of the European Parliament for the European People's Party, Silviu Popovici, the CEO of PepsiCo Europe, Marie-Christine van Hahn, Vice President of Aurubis, Europe's largest copper producer, and Helen Clarkson from the Climate Group, a non-profit organization. Helen will be joining us in a couple of minutes, we hope. Welcome to all of you. We have less than 1 hour ahead of us for this debate, so let me start the session straight away with a keynote speech by Peter Liese. Peter, go ahead. The floor is yours now for the keynote.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the interest of all the people that are watching us. I think it is obvious. It's unfortunately getting more obvious every day that there is an urgent need to address climate change and to mitigate climate change. We already saw this summer very high temperature in the Northern Hemisphere, and this is already indicating that we are in a situation where tipping points can be reached. If the permafrost melts in Siberia, for example, or if the Greenland ice shield melts, then our children and grandchildren, they will not only suffer from climate change, they will no longer have the means to change it, whatever they do. That's why, in fact, we are the last generation that can really make the difference. And we need to do it not only in spite of COVID-19, but I think also the COVID-19 crisis showed how important it is to listen to the science and not to listen to any obscure conspiracy theory. But when you have a threat, you need to look at the scientific advice and follow it. And that's why I think the COVID-19 pandemic doesn't take away the challenge of mitigating climate change. We also have some opportunities. You know, normally we would have been in a room together in Brussels today. We are all in our home office, or most of us, and we spare some emissions by this. That shouldn't be the normal thing. I'm happy to meet you all one day, but you know, sometimes it's also more efficient to use video conference. I was this morning with the transport ministers in Hamburg, yesterday with all the national parliamentarians that deal with COVID-19 in Berlin, but I didn't move from my house because video conference enables us to be together without traveling. So I think we need to do a big step in Europe to reduce the emissions much more than it's planned today. And as you may have heard, Ursula von der Leyen is willing to present move to 55% in her speech next week in the European Parliament. The Commission has made an impact assessment, and obviously the impact assessment indicates that it's economically feasible. I think this is challenging. It will not only bring opportunities, it will also bring a lot of efforts from many parts of industry and many citizens. But it's doable when we do the right steps. In the European Parliament, a lot of colleagues are even going further. Now, the rapporteur in our committee, ENVI committee, Jutta Gütterland, proposed 65%. This is off the table. She united with the Renew Group, the Liberals, for a proposal for 60% now. I still think this is too ambitious. And because I said we need to continue, we need to follow science. But first of all, we have an economic crisis, the biggest that we have seen since the Second World War. So we shouldn't overstretch it. And what is very important, I looked at the figures, I looked at the graphs, and I discussed it with experts from the European Commission. I am not convinced that more than 55% is necessary to do our bit. 55% is really ambitious, and no other major economy in the world is going that far. And we should really focus on that and not even go further. 55 is Paris compatible when you look at the details of the IPCC report. The question now is how we can achieve it. And I think by no means we can just continue our traditional way of climate policy. If we just increase the national targets and the efforts at those that are already in the emission trading, like the copper industry that is affected by the emission trading due to their high electricity consumption, we will overburden these parts of the economy. And the member states have already indicated that just increasing the national targets is very difficult. We need to look at instruments and areas where we didn't do enough in the past. That is, for example, shipping. You know, I said I was this morning in Hamburg with the ministers for transport, and there is a huge contradiction. You know, Social Democrats and Liberals, Renew, in the European Parliament argue for an even higher target, and their respective government ministers are sitting in a meeting where they explain why shipping cannot do more than they did now, and why we need to wait for IMO, international organization that really is not ambitious enough. The same applies for aviation. Aviation has a much lower target than, for example, the ETS that affects copper, the steel industry and other industries. So there needs to be more in areas where the efforts are really poor. We will have co-benefits when we increase our climate targets. We will be less dependent from fossil fuels. And we see how dangerous it is to be dependent from fossil fuels at the moment with Russia. So we don't have the courage to really impose sanctions on Russia because we have an economic problem. Economically, Russia is much more dependent from the European Union than vice versa. Except gas, oil, and coal, they don't have a lot to offer. But because we depend so much on fossil fuels, we are not courageous enough. So I'm in favor of the option of stopping Nord Stream 2. It is a complicated issue, but my political group is in favor. But at the same time, we are also importing oil and coal, even coal we import from Russia. And maybe we should stop this first. This is good for the climate, and it would also put more pressure on Russia to really respect human rights and at least move in the direction of a democracy. When we look at the tools, I think we need to go much more for economic tools and not only rely on command and control. As an example, I would speak about transport. You know, we have CO2 targets for the car industry that are already demanding, and the car industry is in difficulties to COVID-19. I think they are partly responsible themselves, and they should really be more ambitious and look for the future. But it takes time, and already the existing targets are ambitious. Even if we would move the existing target of 37.5% emission reduction for new vehicles in 2030 to zero, so that they don't emit any emission anymore in 2030, the ban of the combustion engine in 2030, this will not do the job. Even under the existing 40% scenario in the European Union, most of the member states, bigger member states that have quite high emissions, like Germany, Italy, like France, they won't achieve their target that is necessary under the existing scenario, because we don't talk about new cars in 2030 when we talk about emissions in 2030. The cars that are produced now, that are produced next year, will be on the street in 2030. So by only addressing the car industry, even if you are much, much more demanding, which I wouldn't recommend, this won't do the job. So we need to have incentives for individuals to use the train, to use the video conference, and not to use the car, even though they have a car. The Greens and the Socialists are arguing, let's do it by command and control measures, but I don't think this is really legitimate. You cannot ask people to not use their car. You cannot prohibit people to use their car when they are owning this car. This should be done by incentives. Public transport must be more attractive. And of course, those people that emit should pay. Otherwise, we won't achieve the target. Last point, we also need to look at the agriculture and forest sector. Agriculture and forest sector is in principle beneficial for the climate. The forest is clear. Trees absorb CO2. That's why we need to take care that forestry, sustainably forest management is a business case in Europe. And unfortunately, due to climate change, because we have this drought, the forests are in a bad condition. And many forest owners are not sure if they will replant the trees. We need to encourage them. And also agriculture can do its bit, especially grassland is beneficial for the climate as well as for biodiversity. But other practices in agriculture, especially high density animal stocks, are not good for the climate. And our common agriculture policy should reflect this even better. To conclude, I think we have to do more, we will do more, but the question if we benefit from this economically, if we can convince people that it's really a good thing, not only for today, but also for the next 10 and 30 years, depends a lot on the instruments. And that means we shouldn't do it the traditional way. We should be innovative also when it comes to the instruments of European climate policy. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Peter Liese, for this very interesting introduction speech here. Let me turn now immediately to our panelists with a question, a general question to all of you, taking a step back probably a little bit from what Peter Liese has just said, because he went already quite a lot into the specific and in a way opened the discussion of how to get there. But if you allow me to maybe take a step back and look at the European Green Deal. that was branded by the European Commission, and this is really very innovative in terms of policy. The Green Deal was branded as Europe's new growth strategy. Obviously, that was before the COVID-19 crisis. Peter Liese just said the crisis won't stop or shouldn't stop Europe from going ahead. So what is your view? Do you believe the Green Deal is indeed a convincing growth strategy, and in particular in these crisis times? And Mr. Popovici, maybe you can start very quickly in just less than 1 minute. And you need to unmute yourself first, Mr. Popovici. You need to click on the microphone that you see at the bottom of your screen. There's a microphone with mute. Nope, you're still muted. Okay, maybe until you find the unmute button, Mr. Popovici, maybe I will turn to our second panelist, Marie-Christine Van Aan from Aurubis. Maybe your quick take on the Green Deal as Europe's new growth strategy. Do you think that is a convincing argument, especially in those crisis times? Marie-Christine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Frederic. Well, first and foremost, I think I wanted to thank Peter Liese for his very striking key impulse. There's nothing we couldn't underline here. It's really from the perspective of Aurubis, which is, as Frederic mentioned in the beginning, is Europe's biggest producer of copper, biggest recycler of copper as well. This has all been true, and now in terms for the Green Deal, yes, of course, Aurubis supports the objectives of the Green Deal as well. I think one very important aspect here is because of the COVID-19 crisis, all those aspects and all those targets and aims, also challenges we have here now, shouldn't be weighed in for each other or against each other. Obviously, we have to recover from this severe economic crisis we're facing. Obviously, we cannot leave the climate change goals out of sight. Now, there's no other way around it. You have to strike at both, and then of course we have been thinking intensively, as everybody else as well, what could be a recipe for that. And in our opinion, as a big industry player of Europe, it is obviously that the clue lies in a stable and healthy industry. We have seen that in the financial crisis as well. If you haven't, you will overcome crises in case you have an economic stability, at least in parts of the economy. And then, if you take our example, we can do two things at once. We can generate productivity, we can generate employment, and at the same time we can invite real good inventions for getting more and more climate efficient and more and more CO2 efficient. This is for stable industries. This is a possibility. Now, what do we need for that? And I'll end with that. For us, the fundament to it all obviously is stable political conditions and sensible political conditions. And I think we will come to that a little later when we come to energy regulation, climate regulation, environmental regulation. due diligence regulation. There's so many regulations you have to keep an eye on. There must be a sensible and reasonable mix of them all to generate our stability. And if we are stable, we can generate, as I said, climate protection inventions and employment as well.
Thank you, Marie-Christine, for these opening comments. Let me try again with Silviu.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
I apologize for the technical thing. So just to add first, very to great comments that they were just said before, two angles. One, in an article that I read at the beginning of August, it said that the COVID-19 caused 600,000 deaths and put 10 million people out of work. And the green gas emission went down only by 8%. So you can look at this and say that this is a massive, massive cost. And if you think, and you can, there are different calculations that actually the climate cost will be even higher than COVID cost in 40 years from now. So this is kind of suggesting that the need for action even now. And the other observation I have is that during COVID-19 crisis, the lockdown, we saw how well the government, the business, and other parts of the society were able to collaborate, to trust each other, and to move extremely fast to protect the people's safety, to maintain the supply chain, to support the ones in need. And if you look at Green Deal now, Green Deal is a great platform to bring all the stakeholders that I just named together. And it's a great catalyst to move and to start to act even faster than the post-COVID. And indeed, the economical crisis will put pressure, but maybe we should look at the economical crisis as a catalyst for innovation and look at the constraint that will force us together to find more innovative ways to deal with the climate change. Because unlike the COVID-19, there is no vaccine for climate change. And practically the more we wait and the more we push the can down the road, the worse it is from the environment. So I think it's a great opportunity to accelerate rather than postpone, and to use the same sense of urgency that collectively we had during the lockdown, dealing with the climate change also.
Thank you, Mr. Popovici. Let me turn now to Helen Clarkson from the Climate Group.
Hi, thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, didn't mean to speak over you. Thanks again for those opening remarks. And I really agree with what was just said there. The best way I've heard, I wish I'd coined this myself, I didn't, but I heard someone say there's no silver lining in COVID, but there is a golden opportunity. And I think that is the point. You know, we didn't go into this year planning this huge global crisis, but at the same time, we're sort of seeing exactly what we just heard there, that things that we thought weren't possible kind of became possible and became, you know, new ways of working, new ways of thinking. And I think what we need now tackling the climate crisis is how do we bring those approaches? And then specifically with the Green Deal, you know, this is going to be the biggest injection of cash that we see into our economies. And so how do we do that in a way that also tackles the climate? I think it's a mistake to look at these as two issues and to think it as like COVID recovery and then dealing with climate. The opportunity comes where we sort of bring those together and think about the recovery as the path to dealing with the climate. You know, when we look at, and we'll go into more detail across the panel, but you know, when we think about what the science is telling us in terms of how we need to radically change the way that we live, the way that we work, the way that we produce across all sectors of society, across all industries, that way of thinking really, really differently is something that we're starting to see everyone do in the last few months. And now we need to apply that thinking as we start to spend this money and go into the recovery period. So, yeah, I think, you know, the questions about, is this a good growth strategy? Is the growth strategy we take on has to be about tackling the climate crisis, having a just transition from the economies that we have now to a climate safe future, and bringing the thinking together around how we do that.
Thanks, Helen, for those comments. So maybe moving on to a different question now, trying to put what the European Union does or is about to do in the coming years and months, comparing that with what's being done in the rest of the world in terms of climate policy. What is your overall impression? I mean, it seems that Europe is taking on some kind of leadership role increasingly. I mean, especially if you compare to the United States or China. We'll see what comes out after the next elections in the US, of course. But what is your overall impression? Do you think Europe is moving too fast, too far? Or on the contrary, do you think it's taking on a kind of leadership role that will allow it to leapfrog other regions or other countries of the world? What is your view on this, Silviu Popovici?
No, we looked at the PepsiCo's sustainability agenda is on top of the list, and within this, if we compare the actions of different governments and across the world, without no doubt, Europe is the most advanced. And actually, we are trying to codify the playbook they are going to develop together in Europe to implement the Green Deal and to use it as a platform for all the other parts of the world. So I think in this is great that Europe is leading this, and we are very supportive of this. And moreover, we are taking the practices in different parts of the world.
So just to follow up on what you just said, what PepsiCo is doing internally as part of your global strategy is to take what Europe does as some kind of blueprint, because you know what's being done over here is going to be automatically good enough for the rest of the world. So effectively, Europe is is setting the standard, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Let me turn now maybe to Peter Liese. What does that make you think? You know, the role of Europe as part of this global competition game. Do you see this, as you alluded to, as an opportunity for Europe now to leapfrog and become, you know, world leaders on competitiveness, generally speaking, of industrial policy competitiveness? Is that how you see things developing?
Yes, it is a huge opportunity, but a lot depends also how we manage to convince our partners in the rest of the world. And United States is a huge problem. So I really hope that we will have another US president next year. And it doesn't seem to be completely unlikely. So we will have a partner again. It was really helpful to work with Obama, but also Obama's people like Todd Stern confirmed that without Europe, there would never have been the Paris Agreement. So Europe was a leader in climate policy, even when the United States had another president. And we need to work with China. That is really of crucial importance. You know, we have a responsibility because we have much more historic emissions than China, but the climate doesn't respect historic arguments. You know, when we emit too much, we will have the tipping points. And that's why I also say to those that try always to protect the rest of the world and say only Europe has a responsibility because we started emitting more than 100 years ago. If China continues to emit as it does and peaks only at 2030, that is their Paris commitment, we will have a huge problem. And that's why I think we need to address China and convince them. And if we have United States, China, and Europe, then it really makes a difference for the global climate. And we need to choose our instruments well. You know, many people criticized our eco-design regulation because, in fact, it leads to prohibiting some products when they consume too much energy. But this applies to China. So there is no competition issue. It may be even an advantage for European companies because they are technologically more advanced. And everybody that imports products to Europe needs to respect them. So we should choose our tools in a way that we protect those stakeholders those industries in Europe that are going the right way and not allowing low quality products to destroy the business model of sustainability.
Thanks, Peter, for that. Maybe one quick follow-up question for you, because I mean, you did mention the fact that it's okay now for Europe to be ambitious and steam ahead, but that is not the position officially at the moment, as far as I know, of the European People's Party. The latest I read about the official position of the EPP was that you said you're ready to go for at least 50% greenhouse gas reduction, but going up to 55 only if other countries or regions follow suit. Is the EPP kind of reconsidering now this stance?
Yeah, I think the position of EPP is under development because if it's true what I have heard, and I suppose it's true, that the Commission impact assessment comes to the conclusion that 55% is economically beneficial. We will look at the impact assessment, of course. We will not just accept it, but I'm sure they did it seriously. That will also have an impact. And yeah, I think the fight in the parliament in October when we vote will not be 50 or 55. The fight will be 60, which is the majority position of the NB committee, and the 55 of the European Commission. By October, when we vote in the parliament, we will have the official position of the European Commission. And when then the lead committee, NV, is for 60%, I think we have to take a decision in EPP. Either we are completely isolated and go for 50%, or we go with the European Commission and work with them to be realistic but very ambitious, and avoid a vote in Parliament that is even more ambitious, where even the Commission would say this is not the way to go. So this will be an interesting time. Everybody moves a bit. I think in the end, our strategy will be that we support the European Commission.
Thank you, Peter. Liese, interesting take about the shifting positions as well in the European Parliament. Things are moving quite fast there as well, it seems. Let me turn now to you, Marie-Christine von Hahn, about the question asked initially, which is Europe's role in the global environment. Do you believe that Europe should indeed take on this leadership role? Do you believe that this will allow it to leapfrog other nations?
Well, I mean, I think many things. I think first and foremost, it's always a question of are you a front runner, or are you like a lonely front runner, or are you a good example? One who wants to be, are you a leader or lone front runner? That maybe to put it that way. And if you set up things and regulations for yourself and nobody else follows, you will be lonesome on the top. That doesn't make sense at all. However, Europe, as the largest single market in the world, can definitely set norms and standards that will enforce others to follow. But the question is how to set up those measures. You have to choose your weapons wisely. And for us, of course, I mean, from our Aurubis perspective, we always have to keep in mind that we are completely within global competition. That means we're in a global run for resources, for our raw materials, and we sell our products to exactly the same price as every other competitor of us around the world sells them too. So if we are facing here, and we're producing in Germany, in Belgium, in Bulgaria, in Finland, in the Netherlands, in Spain, in Italy. So this is so all those costs and secondary costs that we are facing, our competitors don't have. Sorry. So how to go on with that, and then we have to think about how can we stabilize ourselves? How can we still see that Aurubis is getting better and better and more efficient in terms of saving CO2, which is in our own interest, because we have a sense of responsibility. And as Liese said in the beginning, everybody who works at Aurubis wants to leave the world a better place. But however, we have not acknowledged that everybody needs and will want copper for their products of everyday life today. So you have to find a way for that. So how can we think about measures of enabling, enforcing, encouraging our international competitors to be as efficient as we are? Certainly not by something like the carbon border adjustment measures. This will certainly not work. But what about free trade agreements? What about really having a look into setting up sustainability chapters in free trade agreements with countries outside of Europe? This would be probably one one practical example how you could enforce things to make others follow, and that we are not the lone front runner anymore.
Helen Clarkson, maybe a few thoughts from you now about Europe's position in this very competitive global environment. I mean, there are plenty of opportunities. We heard, the belief that there are some real good things to be taken from that, but also a bit of anxiety as well, that Europe could end up becoming a lone front runner. How do you see it from your perspective?
Yeah, the idea that anyone is going too fast on climate is sort of, I'm thinking, no, that I don't agree with that. I just don't think there is a kind of a too fast in that sense. You know, we talked a bit about how Paris came about, and I think the big thing that's obviously changed is a lack of leadership now from the US. And in the absence of that leadership, Europe has got to step up and got to be the leader. You know, we've heard about the historic emissions, and I think it's really, on Europe now to kind of continue that leadership role, which we've seen sort of through the development of the science and what's been happening across Europe. I think there's really strong support for the EU to do that. So in June, 50 global companies called for corporate renewables to be built into the EU's economic stimulus package, including some of Europe's biggest clean energy buyers, so the likes of Mars, the Inca Group, VF Corp. Companies like that are asking for more government support. And, the Climate Group, we're a non-profit organisation. We work with businesses, we work with state and regional governments, and we really see that interplay between what businesses are doing and what governments are doing, and how stimulating corporate demand can also then help governments build that into their regulations and policies. And so I think getting those kind of, I don't like the word synergy, but how those play off each other is really, really critical. And I think we can then take that leadership role and show that there's this opportunity that exists to invest in things like the gaps that we see in the clean energy transition, so things like long haul transportation, grid flexibility, and starting to get into those sustainable solutions on the hard to abate sectors, they're called, so cement and steel. So lots of opportunity there for Europe to be a leader, and certainly the businesses that we work with are supportive of that and would like to see that more progressive policy.
Thank you, Helen. Let me turn now to you again, Silviu Popovici, about, Peter Liese mentioned Europe can indeed lead and not become this lone front runner if it chooses the right tools. And he did mention standards, which other regions need to comply with if they want to export to European countries. How do you see it from the perspective of a global company like yours? I mean, is it something you welcome that governments challenge you to do more, to do better, and something that in fact will help as well roll out those standards to the rest of the world? Is that something you support?
I definitely support, I think, and we can see the type of increase energy, because the sustainability topic was in everyone's agenda for many years, and there were different progress on different vectors. I saw how increased energy level happened when the Green Deal came. So it's a great catalyst that is starting to move everyone in the same direction. And I guess in a way it's creating the same playing field, right? When you come with a new regulation, then people are leaning in with more confidence, knowing that they will not be disadvantaged versus the other players in the market. And I don't know, I can give you an example to life. The Tether cup, which is it's part of the plastic agenda of the Green Deal, when the caps will stay attached to the bottle. This is a great way, while you have to go through an investment to retrofit everything. It's a great way to make sure that the cups are not getting lost in the environment. And this thing can become the norm, and I'm sure that it will become the norm in the next 10 years globally, because it's a great platform that was pushed by the legislator, but actually it makes a lot of sense. It's creating a playing field, and it will become the norm in Europe in the next years, and then globally, I'm sure that it will become the standard everywhere in the world.
Peter, Liese, let me maybe turn back to you now. I mean, you did mention this possibility that Europe, steams ahead, it becomes a global standard setter in a way, but there is at the same time anxiety that we might end up doing things the wrong way, in a way potentially that could penalize our own industries. I mean, the classic example is the carbon-intensive industries, which have much higher costs already now than in other regions of the world. There are different ways of trying to equalize this, to balance out these competitive conditions. One of them is the carbon adjustment mechanism that Marie-Christine said she opposes. But there are other ways as well, like money which is distributed via the emissions trading scheme. How do you see that playing out in the coming years, and what kind of measures would you support?
Yeah, first of all, it's a serious issue, so we shouldn't play it down. That's why I said in my first intervention speech that it is not only opportunities, it's also challenges. And the energy-intensive industry faces challenges already under existing legislation. And we compensate the copper industry. They will get money because the price increase is, of course, a burden from the CO2 price. But still, this is at discussion now in the European Commission. So it's not yet a given. I honestly, Marie-Christine, I wouldn't say certainly not border adjustment, because it is at least something we should look at, and it is not easy. I don't think we just do it and the world is perfect. But we should look at it and choose maybe some products for trying it, and then see what are the consequences. Only rely on trade agreements will take a lot of time. The proposal from the European Commission for the 55% will come next week or in 2 weeks' time. Then we have the legislation next year. Is anybody thinking that we have trade agreements with all our major competitors during the next 3-4 years before this legislation applies? So we should also think about other tools and mechanisms. I think the target is clear. That's a very important point for my group. We want to keep the industry in Europe. We don't want to have a climate neutral Europe because we don't have industry. We want innovation, promote innovation. But those that introduce this innovation, they have a high cost, and that should be a reason to protect them. And at this stage, I wouldn't exclude any tool, but ask the Commission to look at the different tools and then make a proposal.
Helen, Clarkson, maybe a few thoughts about this. I mean, obviously, if Europe goes ahead and becomes a leader, it needs at the same time, it makes sense to also protect those industries which are making those investments and prevent them from suffering from unfair competition. The expression environmental dumping was used in the past, I remember, by Nicolas Sarkozy when he was president of France. Do you think that idea now has reached a stage where it is more widely accepted as a means of doing business and making sure that green policies don't penalize those who implement them?
Yeah, I mean, I would actually just come at it from a different angle, which is, there's overwhelming evidence about the cost of climate change if we don't tackle it, and we can't do business on a dead planet is the kind of cliche. So I think just sort of ripping up a bit some of the norms and the way that we've thought about things is probably where we need to start. And I think we're seeing some really good things on that from sort of how the Green Deal, which, would not have been talked about a few years ago, is coming about. I think there's been really interesting approach, surveys and polling of people actually related to COVID about this phrase, the new normal, and what do we mean by that? What is life after COVID like? And there's so much evidence, first of all, that people don't want to go back to business as usual. They can see the kind of impact that business as usual has on their daily lives, has on them as people, the systems that we have. There's so much awareness from the school strikes and onwards. And secondly, that people see that climate change is a bigger threat actually than COVID. It's on that sort of scale. So I think there's this opportunity now to really question some of these concepts that we might have had and trying to understand what does competitive mean in this new landscape. And what we're seeing with businesses that we work with, those that set really ambitious targets outperform the market in lots of measures. And it's really interesting. There's not necessarily a kind of cause and effect relationship. You set a renewable energy target, your stock price moves. It's more about how well run companies envisage themselves, how they see their role within society, what good long-term business planning looks like, what business leadership looks like. And we're doing a lot of work on, what does business leadership look like in the next decade and beyond? And really forward-thinking business leaders are understanding the impact of climate on them, on their long-term planning, and what they contribute to the climate, not just in terms of carbon emissions, but in these sort of systemic risk approach and how they fit into these larger systems. So I that's why I've sort of pushed back a bit on phrases that might have been used a while ago. We have to really think differently about how we tackle the next 2 or 3 decades. And I do think that leads to opportunity. There's a big job agenda here if we can grasp it right, and to understand how the just transition will work.
Thanks, Helen. That's a very optimistic and positive view of things. Let me now turn to a different subject that kept us, all of us, I think, very...
just 1 second. Could I just very briefly respond to Peter Liese?
Yes, Marie-Christine, sorry. Go ahead.
Just because one thing is very important. We at Aurubis like to think of ourselves as open-minded and open to discussion. So, and every concept for any idea of safeguarding our competitiveness is much appreciated, and we'd like to give our input. The only thing the only point I wanted to make with the carbon border adjustment mechanisms is that we really looked into it, and we really think that it will be easy to circumvent. There's lots of opportunities to not fulfill the conditions in the end. It's way too complicated. It will increase the bureaucracy to comply with those mechanisms. So so in the end, I think there's other ideas like those carbon contract for difference. Also, one should look into. We really don't think that the idea is thought through in the end. In the end, one important point will be that we have competitive electricity prices to intensify our electrification of industrial processes. So what I want to say is we need incentivization for deployment of climate neutral technologies and safeguard our competitiveness. And as I said in the beginning, we are super open to think about new concept, but CBAMs, we don't see the point.
Okay, that's
that was just it.
That's good. And indeed, those carbon contracts for difference, I think that's an idea that's been kind of saw the light in Germany and seems to be gaining traction as well at the European Commission level. I think it was mentioned also as part of the Green Deal. But maybe just turning to one recent landmark agreement that we had at the European level, which was struck just before the summer break in July about a recovery plan. I mean, we're talking about 750 billion euros and the creation of joint debt at the European level. I mean, this is really unprecedented. Some of our leaders have called this agreement historic. Silviu Popovici, what does that inspire you? Do you believe now that Europe is kind of getting its act together? Has Europe sort of learned the lessons from the financial crisis and the Eurozone crisis and finally got its act together?
I don't know, if I step back and observe the transformation over the last, let's say, 18 months, and I just take the angle of how the European Union interacts with the business and so on, I see a major shift. I see a shift into even the Green Deal. In itself, it's a proof of a lot of political will, and that we didn't see so much in the past. And I guess indeed the new agreement is showing that there is a different level of political, which is impressive, and we are very happy to see this. Yeah? I also mentioned the way that the interaction with the different constituents during the COVID. It was another example of how we see different type of interaction of parts of the society, which is absolutely the right thing to do, as all the problems are multi-stakeholders, and there is not just a problem of the government, and the problem of the business, and the problem of society. They are all interconnected, and this is why the solutions should be also across stakeholders and so on. And the proposal is to your point, historical. I think it's a great step ahead.
And would you say the Green Deal in itself, are you satisfied with the way the European Commission proposes to steer this as a kind of a collective endeavor, not just policymakers imposing their views top down, but also trying to involve civil society, business, local governments as well into the policymaking process? Is that something
absolutely? No, I think it's absolutely the right way to approach it, and it's absolutely I think the way I can say the only way to progress. And as I said, the solution are multi-stakeholders and involve a lot of parts. And I just then one part only cannot come with a solution, because obviously you need to come with innovative solution and find creative solutions to problems, and this requires several people in the room to think through and to understand the implications and so on. And I think, as I said, and I participated in forums around the Plastic Alliance or the Circular Plastic Alliance and so on, and they are great examples of how to do different will yield a different result.
Marie-Christine van Hahn, maybe a few comments on the collaborative approach of the Green Deal. Are you satisfied with the way businesses and civil society generally are being consulted as part of this? Do you feel that you're being part of that Green Deal yourself, or do you feel that you're being left on the side?
No, we're not left on the side. I think really in terms of communication between the Commission, between the Parliament on the one side and us on the other side, and civil society, there has been so much progress. Has been so much progress over the last years, and so much more awareness of that this communication between those different actors is very important, because all of their interests are very important. And obviously, when developing some concept like the Green Deal, you will have to keep in mind all those different interests. And I think there's a great awareness to that. So multi-stakeholder approach, in my opinion, in our opinion, is always a good way. Of course, I mean, also once again to the Green Deal as such. With the objectives, we're super fine. We still see quite some, well, you might want to put it as conflicting policies or conflicting aims within it. So there need to be a lot more discussions how to really design the nitty-gritty of the implementation of the Green Deal in the end. But we as industry, as European industry, really want to make a contribution here, and we are willing to contribute to make this all work. Because, yeah, as said in the beginning, with this massive crisis we're facing right now, we have not only the one goal from before, fighting climate change, but now fighting economic instability at the same time.
Right, maybe now some remarks to conclude, because we're reaching the end of this panel discussion about the recovery plan. I mean, we're now entering the next phase where the member states put together national plans. They need to be discussed at a European level. They need to be approved by the Commission, but also by the other member states. How do you see that process shaping up in the coming months, Peter, Liese? Frans Timmermans, the Commission Vice President, recently said there was a risk that the national plans would end up pulling in different directions, some of them potentially being, greener than others, or even contradicting each other. How do you see that governance process in the months ahead?
Yeah, first of all, it's good that Europe agreed on this recovery plan. We had a time in March and April where there was no willingness to react on the major economic crisis, especially in Italy, Spain, and France. And I urged also the German government to be more open and supportive. And it is good that Ursula von der Leyen called it Next Generation EU. So we should invest in the future. We can't come back to the normality before COVID. We need to use this money to transfer the society. And it's important for the young generation. We will create a lot of financial burden for the young generation. And I think Next Generation EU should not only mean that they have to pay back the money, but that they also have a modern infrastructure, and that means an infrastructure that is bringing us away to climate neutrality. So the ideas are good, but the implementation, already the Commission proposal was good in words, but not good in concrete tools. What the Council did, the EU summit, made it even worse, and the implementation of member states is really not enough. So I expect the young generation to mobilize in their respective countries and put pressure. So young people should say, it's our money, spend it for the future. That is really necessary now.
Okay, thank you to all of you for joining this panel discussion. I'm afraid we've gone already a little bit over time. And so I would like to thank you for joining this panel discussion. I'd like to thank also all the online participants for joining in. And well, I wish you a very good end of day, and we can conclude the discussion here. Maybe a last word from some of the panelists. Maybe something I forgot in the last session. Your big idea. Peter, Liese, your big idea in a nutshell.
So first of all, going to 55% emission reduction is already a big idea, but I would add one more big idea. We need a price on carbon in Europe for everything, not only for electricity, that it affects copper, but also in transport, in housing, and also in agriculture. That is not easy, especially in agriculture. It's difficult to monitor, but farmers could use it as an opportunity. So those farmers that have grassland, that plant trees, they will get the benefit. Those people that use the bicycle will get the benefit, that insulate their houses, but others will also get under pressure. I don't think we can achieve ambitious climate targets without a carbon price at European level for everything that creates climate change. And this is something we should really work for. I don't think that we will manage to achieve the targets without that carbon price for all the sectors in the whole European Union.
Right. Thank you. Silviu Popovici,
yes,
your big idea. Go ahead.
A great idea was just announced today that there are 80 companies from different parts, producer, manufacturing, processors of waste and so on. They announced the initiative that we're going to test the invisible watermarks, which is an invisible stamp that you can put on every piece of packaging that can be recognized at high definition camera in the waste processing facilities. So you can sort the waste and then process it in more value added rather than just burn them, which is the case now. So this is an idea when digital innovation can come and create value out of garbage, if you want. So, and it's creating a circular economy that starts to create more economic value. But maybe I just another one that I think it's, and it's linked with what Peter was saying, is this: how do you create transparency? So there is good visibility of the environmental impact of every piece of packaging if I stay on the packaging area. And if we can mark every single packaging with a code that reflects exactly the carbon footprint, the real cost of carbon, this will, and this is transparent and visible for everyone, this will nudge all players, companies and consumer to make more environmental sustainable choices, and manufacturer to move to more environmental sustainable choices, because now it's transparent and nobody can hide. So this special mark on the packaging that can be digitalized with QR codes and so on will create transparency around the value chain, and then the industries will adjust.
Mary-Christine van Hahn, your big idea for climate policy in a way that sustains industry.
I try to make it very short. Trust industry, and trust particularly the European metals and particularly the European copper industry, because metals make the world go round. Metals will enable us to establish a greener future and to establish a circular economy around the world, and particularly in Europe. And vital, healthy European metals industry will help doing that. And I hope I made it clear beforehand. I think the Commission is on the right track here with the objectives of the Green Deal, with establishing good new partnership in this industry alliances, such as the European Raw Materials Alliance. This is very, very good approaches that will be heavily supported by us. So we are on a good track, but with great, great challenges ahead.
Okay, and Helen Clarkson, you will have the honor of concluding your big idea.
No, can I make it big enough to be the last? So listening to those, and I was thinking of saying something about the youth, but I think Peter Liese said that very well, that, you know, they're going to pay for this. But sort of coming back to what they're facing at the moment, the massive jobs crisis that's about to strike us. And there is a real route through this, which is a jobs and climate agenda. And to give you one example, because I think people straight away go to renewable energy jobs, which is one of the fastest growing job growth sectors. If you look at the US, it's a very fast growing sector there. And so that's where people's mind go. But things like domestic retrofit, we do not have a really good idea how to do this. I'm a little bit obsessed by it. Most of the houses in Europe that we're going to have in the next few decades are already built. And we don't have a really good methodology of getting in there. We know that heating and cooling is a massive problem, but yet there's not a really good idea. You can create jobs there about going, how do you go door to door and do this? How do you figure that out? So that's one example. But I think really tying the jobs agenda and the climate agenda together is going to be really powerful in terms of how do we use the recovery to also achieve our carbon emissions reductions targets.
Thanks, Helen, for these, concluding remarks. So thanks again to the panelists for joining us today. Thanks to the online audience. We'll be concluding today's Ideas Festival with this session, and the festival opens again tomorrow. So watch this space for more interesting discussions. I'll be moderating, for example, a panel on biodiversity tomorrow. So stay tuned and good evening. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.